First thing is that I hope I will meet the expectations of the presentation that has been so generous by Nigel. And to all of you, my greetings, my thanks to my Colombian fellows that came directly to this gathering with President Santos in London. It's a pleasure and a privilege to speak at Merchant Taylors Hall, this legendary institution. I also salute the public servants from the British government, from the Colombian government, the members of the Chamber of Commerce, UK Colombia, the members of the business community, our colleagues from the Banking Association and the Oil Association of Colombia that are present here. And well, thank you, all of you, for being here. I was remembering that I've been several times in London for seminars about Colombia. But I remember very specially one that we had 10 years ago, in 2001, I'm sorry. The ambassador was Victor G. Ricardo. And the name of that seminar was, Why Colombia? The truth is that there was no answer to that question 10 years ago. But when you take a look at all the things that have happened in Colombia in this decade, a country that in 2001 was in the middle of an isolation, unprecedented in Latin America, in the middle of despair, of recession, a democracy at risk because it had at its doors terrorism, but inside its premises, the drug cartels. But at the same time, those times were times of reform in economics, times of strengthening our armed forces, of taking action against human rights violation, of strengthening our institutions, our public and private institutions. So what I'll try to do with you in this minutes, and at the end, I hope we will have some questions and answers minutes, is to tell you what has happened to Colombia in this decade of good governance, of good political decisions, of good economic policy, and how that has changed the country with the economic consequences of having a strong foreign policy and a dynamic reform policy. And the first thing I have for you is this charter. Maybe all the figures you have there, you have already heard them from the president or from the minister or from our very illustrious speakers from the UK. But when you put them all together, you can have an idea of what has happened to Colombia in 10 years. First, the size of our economy. Our GDP in 2000 was a little more than 94 billion US dollars. And this year will be in $335 billion. It means that the size of the Colombian economy will be 4 times bigger than 10 years ago, with an economic growth that is the double in average to the one we had in the last decade before that. Consequently, the GDP per capita has moved from 2.3 thousand US dollars to 7.3. And that puts to the Colombian system and politics and to the Colombian economic functioning the biggest challenges of change, of modernization, of competition, of transparency, of security, of course. In foreign trade, we had a total foreign trade 10 years ago of around 25 billion US dollars. This year, 2011, is going to be $110 billion. It's growing at 2 digits, every year, not only the raw materials, but also the non-traditional exports and the industrial exports. Our international reserves also moved from $9 billion to $36 billion this year. And investment as percentage of the GDP has now Asian levels, 27%. Maybe we will close around 29% by December, by next month of this year. Foreign direct investment. I always say that there are two economic agents that know more than governments, that know more than the United Nations system, that know more than multilateral banks or the International Monetary Fund. That's tourists and foreign investors. And when you have foreign investors that have moved from $2.5 billion of FDI to $14.5 billion of FDI, something good must be happening in Colombia. And when you move from 500,000 tourists to 4 million tourists, something good must be happening in that place. And that place, of course, now is Colombia. Our foreign debt and our fiscal debt have moved dramatically down from around 40% to around 21% in foreign and 28% in fiscal. That is something we Colombians should put in our form of request for an European visa, just to inform the consulate how we are behaving. Inflation is in international levels, and interest rates are the lowest in our history. Unemployment is moving down very rapidly. We think it will close around 9% this year, 2011. But also, in that seminar 10 years ago, the debate, and Alejandro Martinez will remember that, was how are we going to pay our oil bill in 2012? What adjustment do we have to do now, 10 years before, to prepare to that time? Well, this year, 2011, we're going to produce roughly half of what Venezuela produces in oil and gas. And that's the biggest change for the relative abundance that Colombia is going to live in the next generation, is that we're going to have resources. We are going to have tranquility in our balance of payments. We are going to have available fiscal resources to deal with infrastructure and social issues. Also in the social field, we have moved very fast ahead. The poverty rate that used to be in 95, 60%, it means 6 of every 10 Colombians were poor. It has moved to 37% in 2010, and our calculations in Andy is that this year, 2011, it will close around 34, 35%. In political terms, my dear friends, it can be said that for the first time in our history, Colombia is a society of a non-poor majority. And it makes a change. It makes the biggest change, maybe, in our history. That's the trend we have to keep. It's still a high percentage of poverty, but the trend is the important thing. And we think that it's possible to put it down to 15% in the next 6 to 7 years. Health has a universal coverage in Colombia. That's something that is not very well known, but it is so. The debate now in our country is not how many new Colombians are going to be covered by the health insurance, but what kind of services can we give them? What quality of services? Where? What kind of medical education we have to have? And so on. But I think this of universal health coverage is one of the biggest revolutions we have. With education, where we have moved up in university schooling 10 percentage points or more, and we have universal coverage also for primary education. All those figures visually are like this. That's the behavior of GDP, the size of our economy. By the way, we used to be number 7 in size in Latin America 10 years ago. We are now number 4 after Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina. And I say, not very diplomatically, that if we keep doing what we are doing now, Argentinians and Colombians, Colombia will be number 3 in 4 years. The GDP per capita has moved to those levels you see there. Let me tell you this. 4 years ago, Colombia was a market for cars of just 150,000 units. Next year, we'll be very close to 500,000. And the market of motorcycles has tripled, and the market of computers and appliances and housing, things like that, that show that really this growth in GDP per capita is being reflected in demand. You have seen the maps of where we stand now in economic integration with the world, but I just want to add one thing. In 2006, the average of tariffs in Colombia was around 13%. Nowadays, it is 5.3%. We have already matched the average of the OECD. By the way, we are requesting membership in OECD. It shows to you that by 5.3%, that we have opened our economy in a way that permits growth of industrial capacity inside, that permits transformation of agricultural production, but mostly that permits modernization of the production of services, industry, and agriculture with domestic and foreign investment in the highest levels. We have already into force the treaties with Canada and with Switzerland. Finally, the US Congress voted our FTA a month ago. We will have that treaty in force, we hope, by the visit of President Obama to Cartagena in April or the latest in the second semester of next year. And with the European Union, we have already a chronogram for the ratification of our treaty. It is already in Strasbourg for ratification through the European Parliament. This is also a charter I always love to show. The green line is growth, and the red line is the monthly poll about insecurity that Andy holds monthly since 1994. The conclusion is that when we had the highest perception of insecurity, we had the lowest growth. And now that we have the lowest perception of insecurity, we can grow at 8% or at 5.5%, what we are doing right now. That's Uribe's legacy, ladies and gentlemen, security. And that's what the current government of President Santos has improved and has moved forward with economic reform. But this has been really the change of trust and confidence in Colombian functioning economics and politics. This is the way poverty rate fell. And this is also a chart that is very interesting, is that we have been conducting a poll for 7 years in a row now, asking what percentage of your total sales you put into corporate social responsibility programs. And it's around 2.5%. The average in Europe is 1.5%. My conclusion of this charter is that change has been possible in Colombia mostly because of a sound public policy, but also because the private sector has had programs in social responsibility. This is not a minor amount, 2.5 from total sales. It has to be in the future so to reach the development status. Well, I told a joke about Argentina, I'm sorry. Recent performance. These are the latest data. 5.2 first semester. In Andy, we think the final growth of this year is going to be around 5.7%. And the good news is that growth comes from a general good performance of all the sectors. There isn't only one engine of growth. Almost all of them are growing. The bad news is that infrastructure is not growing. And we insist on that every single time in Colombia or outside. That has to be one of the engines of real competitiveness and growth in the future. But as you see, as of June 30th this year, every single sector is growing: agriculture, mining, manufacturers, utilities, trade, transportation, finance, even the government. But infrastructure is not. It's in negative grounds still. But we think with the decisions that have been taken in financing infrastructure, in really having detailed projects to present to investors, starting in 2012, we will have infrastructure as an engine of growth also. Here, the interesting data is that investment is growing at 13.3% yearly basis. That's I think the most indicative symptom of future growth of the Colombian economy, that very high rate of investment growth. That's, as I said, Asian level. Manufacturing is behaving very well, growing 5.5, sometimes 6, or exceptional months like August at a very impressive 9.5%. But the industry is going well. The business climate is at its highest levels with the exception of 2006, and the expectations are also very high. So the investment decisions are coming fluently. And our foreign trade, as I said, is going to be $110 billion this year, but with growth rates that are very impressive, because coffee is growing at 55, 57% because of high prices. So is oil or coal. But the non-traditional exports, with a very strong peso and a very strong revaluation process, are growing at a very respectable 18%. And the industrial, more than 18%. There are few countries in the world nowadays that can show industrial exports growing at more than 18%. And the imports of capital goods and raw materials respond for more than 80% of our total exports, which means that we are in a process of modernization and in a process of supplying new markets and the growth of the internal market. This is our partners. Where are our partners? Where them? The United States, as a major trade partner, moved from 50% of our exports to 37%. Venezuela from 18% to 10% in 10 years. And Asia moved up from 3% to 8%. And the European Union moved from 14% to 15%. But other countries, Africa, the Arab world, and so on, they moved from 13% to more than 26%. It allowed us to replace Venezuela as a market of greatest importance after the illegal embargo of 2009. And we replaced Venezuela with 36 new destinations in 36 new countries. And we now can see Venezuela as a market we will love to supply in the future if they find payment mechanisms better than the ones they had in the past. That sounded very diplomatic, didn't it? Well, macroeconomics fast. Inflation going down, deposit rates the lowest, international reserves high, stock markets, although going down a little, in very high levels. The growth of the financial sector is more than 23%. So that horizon of macroeconomics is in good shape. What are the targets for the future? The targets for the future are, one, the competitiveness agenda. Colombia has started 6-7 years ago a very respectable way of producing public policy in economics. It's the benchmarking, the international benchmarking, to be in the lists of the World Bank, of the IMF, of the World Economic Forum, and say, we have to move up, we have to do this, we have to change this, we have to regulate in a better way. And it has been a success. We have been moving up in our barometer of competitiveness. But we have to stand there and keep reforming and keep doing things to become more competitive with a view of foreign trade. We have to be reliable for foreign direct investment. We have to be reliable for credit, not only for the government, but for the private sector. We have to be reliable in foreign trade, and of course, in our demand for technology. In a way that competitiveness could bring us in 9 more years or so to be an economy of a size of more than $600 billion. It is possible. If you take a look of what we did between 2000 and 2010, if we do that again, we will be at $600 billion of GDP with a per capita income of around $12,000 that is now is another status to be there as a member of the OECD more peacefully. Foreign direct investment, we're going to have a record this year of almost $15 billion. But these charters that follow, with that I will end, are the charters that show where the biggest opportunities for foreign investors, I would say for UK investors, are. First, infrastructure. We have a GDP in infrastructure of around $12 billion. The challenge with the investment announced by the National Development Plan for the next 4 years is to move to $16 to $18 billion of GDP annually in infrastructure. So it's going to need a big amount of foreign direct investment and a big amount of internal work to have the projects in shape to be offered to investors. But here is the most important opportunity to make business in Colombia. Utilities, they have doubled in also 7 years. What we hope, what we foresee, is that we will double again in the next 4 years. Also a big chance. Telecommunications, again, it double-folded in 5 years. It's going to be a $15 billion of GDP in the next 4. And mining. Mining and oil is now around 8-9% of Colombian GDP. But if you exclude oil, mining is only 3.9%. So oil is going to grow, exploration is moving up, successful exploration is a news you see on the papers every week. Every week you find an oil well in Colombia. And mining has to deal with the conviction politicians in Colombia have to have that having a mining activity is a good thing. We have to start there. I'm sorry to say that. But still the debate that some extremes bring to the table saying, a country shouldn't have a mining activity. We can't accept that. This is going to be the first time where our natural resources are going to be at the disposal of the next generation of Colombians. And now we say, no, we can't. No, we can't. We can do that. We have to do that with the best environmental standards in the world. But we have to be able to deal with that debate positively and move that GDP in mining from 4% to 12%, levels of Canada or Australia or Chile in the next 10 years. That's also a big opportunity. Manufacturing has the challenge of multiplying by 3 times its exports in the next 6 years. We have adopted that program with the government to make our exports of manufacturing a goal. It's achievable. We have already done that in the last 6 years. We can repeat the story in the future. Well, let me finish saying this. In conclusion, what you have in Colombia is that we are back. We are back in business. We were out of them for 25, 30 years. We are back. The 3rd largest population in Latin America is back. The 4th largest economy in Latin America is back. The strongest democracy in Latin America is back. So it's a fact. Not only a question of deciding being back. No, facts have put us back in the scenario of the world. Number 2, the horizon for Colombia in the next 2 decades is very favorable because we are a diversified economy, but also because we have natural resources that we can take advantage of them. We also have to learn in Colombia how to deal with that relative abundance. We have to very clearly choose our path, Norway or Nigeria. And that's the challenge of the private organizations, of those that represent the private sector. Let's choose the Norway path. Let's choose the Chilean path, not the other one. They're both rich countries with poor people, one side of them. For the UK, the opportunities are incredible, not only in all those sectors I've shown to you, but also in technology, in environment, in security, of course, in green energy, green entrepreneurs, green financing, and so on. So we will be ready to cooperate with the UK to enhance that cooperation. And let me finish with this. We have come from isolation 10 years ago to leadership. That's what is Colombia today. We are a major regional power in Latin America, a respected one. And that's why when I saw the motto of this house that is up the screen there, I think it shows the recent story of Colombia. It says, in harmony, small things grow. That was what has happened in Colombia. Harmony is back to Colombia inside. And that's why we feel so proud to come to London and say, welcome, this time don't miss it. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Villegas certainly lived up to his advanced billing there, and Colombia is back, and more importantly, Colombia's cream of business are here today, following the Norway model, we hope. You very kindly said you'd take a few questions. Your name, your company, and try and keep the questions short. And no, despite the fact that he is clearly completely at ease with figures, you are not allowed to ask about the percentage of Colombian coal exports in 1993 that went to Portugal from mines where high school dropouts numbered more than 30% of the mining employees. Any questions? At the back there, sir. Wait for a microphone to come to you. Just behind you. Ooh, it's gone on there. Your microphone isn't on quite yet. It'll come, it'll come. Try the other microphone.
My name is Carlos Caicedo from Exclusive Analysis. Thank you very much for such an excellent presentation. I have a question about, you mentioned Colombia is a very diversified economy, and indeed mining and oil are going to be the new frontier for Colombia. Many people expect this country to produce 1 million barrels a day, if not this year, next year. My question is, precisely because Colombia hasn't been a big miner country and a big oil producer, the economy is highly diversified. So what is the danger that indeed the whole projections come through and Colombia become a major player in mining and oil, and that will become a downside for the other sectors of the economy, the so-called Dutch disease? At the moment, Brazil is exactly struggling with that problem of having a very strong currency because of the strong growth of commodities. So how Colombia is looking at that in the next 4 or 5 years if it eventually becomes a big oil and mining producer?
We have not only the challenge of abundance in resources because of oil and mining. That's number one. But that is going to happen in a scenario where the main currencies in the world have adopted a policy of devaluation. So we have on the two extremes of the monetary chain challenges. How to deal with that? It's almost impossible with the things you cannot control. But it is possible with the things you can. And those are basically the fiscal figures. You have to become a state that saves, a state that is counter-cyclical when you need to spend because there's the acceleration of the economy, you have the resources to do so. And when you have abundance, you can save inclusively in international currencies. I think Colombia has the legal framework for that. We have passed 2 laws that reform the constitution and reform the fiscal regulation. The president mentioned them as the fiscal rule that gives the government the order to save in abundance and the order to spend, or the possibility to spend in hard times, with certain levels that you cannot trespass. And the reform of the constitution, where all the decisions of the state have to take into account the availability of resources for that decision to be put in place. Judges, high courts, Congress, regional authorities, mayors and governors, and of course the executive. I think that's the question. And the second remedy internally is a tax reform that we have to deal with in the future that will help not only competitiveness, but also will help the government to get more resources from the tariffs and taxes and then save more. And by that way to face those challenges of currencies that are going to be crazy for the next decade.
Thank you very much indeed. I fear we probably ought to draw this question and answer session to a close, but you will be here over lunch and people will be able to come up and ask you follow-up questions then. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Villegas.